The morning of my daughter's wedding rehearsal, I was standing in my kitchen in Oak Park, Illinois, pressing the napkins I'd embroidered with her initials. 68 years old, and there I was, ironing linen at 6 in the morning because I couldn't sleep. I'd been awake since 4, listening to the furnace click on and off, thinking about how my husband Howard would have made fun of me for fussing so much. He passed 11 years ago. Pancreatic. Fast and merciless, the way some men go. My daughter Hollis was 32 then, and her fiancé, a man named Trent Vaughn, had been in our lives for about a year and 7 months. He worked, supposedly, in private wealth management out of a small office in Schaumburg. He drove a leased Audi. He had a smile that never quite reached his eyes, the way some salesmen do, where the mouth moves but the face stays still. I want to be clear about something before I go any further. I am not the kind of mother who hates every man her daughter brings home. I liked the boy she dated in college. I liked the dentist she dated at 26. I even liked the one who turned out to be married, because at least he was honest about it once we caught him. But Trent, from the first Sunday dinner, when he asked me how much my late husband's pension paid out, I knew. I just knew. The way you know a fish is bad before you cook it. Something in the smell. That morning of the rehearsal, Hollis came over to pick up the napkins. She walked in with Trent behind her, and he was already talking on his phone, pacing my kitchen like he owned it. He didn't say good morning. He didn't take his shoes off, even though there was a sign right by the door. The same sign that's been there since 1994. He walked all the way across my white living room rug in winter boots that had salt on them. Hollis kissed my cheek. She said, "Mom, the napkins are gorgeous. Oh my God, you didn't have to." And then Trent came off his call and looked at me like he was just now noticing I was in my own kitchen. And he said, "Hey, Maureen, listen. About tonight at the rehearsal dinner. I was thinking maybe you skipped the toast." I said, "I'm sorry." He said, "The toast. You know. The mother of the bride's speech. We've got a tight run of show. I think it's better if Hollis's stepdad does it. Cleaner." Now, you have to understand, Hollis doesn't have a stepdad. She has the man my younger sister married, who Hollis calls Uncle Reggie, and he and Trent had golfed twice. That's it. That's the entire foundation of stepdad. I looked at Hollis. She was looking at the napkins, smoothing them with her thumb, and she didn't say a word. Not one word. And I understood in that moment that something had been happening for a while that I had not been paying enough attention to. Some little erosion, some quiet rerouting of who counted in my daughter's life. I said, "I'll think about it, Trent." He laughed. He actually laughed at me in my own kitchen, and he said, "Maureen, no offense, but you've got to let her fly the nest at some point, right? You can't be the main character at every event. You did your part." And then he winked at me. I am telling you, that wink lives in my body still. I felt it in my jaw. Hollis finally looked up and she said, "Mom, he's just stressed about the timing. Don't take it personal." They left. The salt from his boots had dried in 2 long streaks across my rug. I sat down at the kitchen table and I did not cry. I want to be very honest with you. I did not cry. I made a pot of coffee and I sat with it, and I thought about my late husband Howard, who used to say, "Maureen, the loudest dogs are the ones with the most to hide. Watch the loud ones." That afternoon, instead of going to get my hair done like I'd planned, I drove out to the office of a man named Bernie Kallenbach. Bernie was Howard's friend from the Knights of Columbus, and after Howard died, Bernie helped me sort out the estate. He retired from a long career as a forensic accountant for the IRS. He grew tomatoes now, and he did the occasional favor for old friends. I sat in Bernie's little converted garage office, and I said, "Bernie, I need you to look into someone for me, quietly, and I need you to do it before October 14th. Bernie looked at me over his reading glasses. He said, "Maureen, is this about your daughter's fella?" I said, "It is." He said, I've been waiting for this call for 6 months. That was the first time I cried that day. Just a little, because somebody else had seen what I'd seen. I gave Bernie everything I had. Trent's full legal name, his date of birth that I'd memorized from the engagement announcement, the name of his supposed firm, the make and lease company of his car, the address of the condo he claimed he owned in Wicker Park. I gave him the names of the 2 business partners Trent had bragged about at Easter. I gave him the name of Trent's mother, who he claimed lived in Naples, Florida, and who had never once been on a phone call with us, not even on Hollis's birthday. Bernie said, "Give me 3 weeks." The wedding was 8 months out. Hollis had wanted a long engagement so she could plan everything herself. I went home and I started my own list on the yellow legal pad, the way Howard used to make lists. I called it Things That Don't Add Up. It had 41 items on it by the end of that week. The condo with no parking spot listed in his name. The firm whose website had no team page. The mother in Florida who never called. The way he steered conversations away from his childhood. The way he asked, 3 different times, about the lake house in Wisconsin that Howard and I had bought in 1992. That lake house. I want to tell you about it because it matters. Howard and I bought it the year Hollis turned 8. It's a small place. 2 bedrooms, a screen porch, a dock that I rebuild myself every other spring. It sits on a lake called Pleasant Lake, which is a name Howard made fun of for 30 years because the lake is, in fact, very pleasant, and he said that was lazy naming. The deed has been in my name alone since 2014, when we did the estate planning before Howard's diagnosis got bad. It's worth about $420,000 now, give or take, depending on the market. It is the only thing I have left that Howard and I built together. Brick by brick, summer by summer. Trent had mentioned twice at family dinners that he and Hollis could really see themselves at the lake house long term. Once he asked me very casually whether I'd considered estate planning options for it. He said, "You know, Maureen, a place like that just sitting there, it's a tax burden. A tax burden. A tax burden." Howard used to call it our cathedral. 3 weeks went by. Bernie called me on a Tuesday morning in March. He said, "Maureen, can you come out here? I don't want to do this on the phone." I drove out. He had a folder. The folder was thick. Trent Vaughn was not. Trent Vaughn was not Trent Vaughn. His legal name was Travis Donald Vaughn Pruitt, and he had been Travis Pruitt until 2019, when he legally changed it. The firm he claimed to work at did exist, but he wasn't a registered advisor with FINRA, never had been. He was working there as a contracted client liaison, which Bernie explained meant he booked meetings and got commissions on referrals. His income, Bernie estimated, was probably about $48,000 a year. Not the $280,000 he had told Hollis. The condo was not his. It belonged to a woman named Drina Hall, who was 46, divorced, and a dermatologist in Lincoln Park. Bernie had photographs. Bernie had a lot of photographs, but that was not the worst part. Bernie put a single sheet of paper in front of me. It was a list of 3 women, their names, ages, the cities where they lived, and the column at the right that said how much money each of them had transferred to accounts associated with Travis Pruitt between 2017 and 2023. One woman in Cincinnati. $61,000. He'd been engaged to her in 2018. She broke it off after she found the second phone. One woman in Indianapolis, a widow, 58 years old. $44,000. He'd convinced her to invest in a private fund that did not exist. She got some of it back, not all. And one woman, here in the Chicago area, in Glen Ellen. Her name was Penelope Marsh. She was 34 years old. She had been engaged to Travis Pruitt in 2021, and she had paid for a wedding venue, a photographer, and a honeymoon to St. Lucia, totaling about $28,000, before he disappeared 2 weeks before the wedding. Penelope Marsh had never recovered the money. She had also, Bernie noted carefully, filed a police report that didn't go anywhere, because the legal threshold for prosecution was complicated, and she was, in the eyes of the state's attorney, simply a woman who had been dumped. I sat there in Bernie's garage with my hands folded on top of that folder, and I did not say anything for a long time. Bernie poured me a glass of water. Finally, I said, "Bernie, what would you do?" He said, "Maureen, I'm not going to tell you what to do, but I'm going to tell you what I would not do. I would not tell your daughter on a phone call. I would not tell her in a coffee shop. I would not tell her at all until I had the kind of proof that her brain could not argue with. She is in love. Love is the most expensive blindfold there is." He was right. I knew he was right. I went home and I made another list. This one I called the plan. Item 1. Find Penelope Marsh. I sent her a letter, the old-fashioned way. I introduced myself. I told her I was the mother of a woman who was engaged to a man she might recognize. I included a photograph of Trent that Hollis had posted on her Facebook. I gave Penelope my phone number and my address, and I said, "I am not asking you for anything. I just want you to know that you are not crazy and you are not alone. And if you would ever like to talk to me, I would like very much to listen." She called me 4 days later. We talked for 2 hours. She cried. I cried. At the end she said, "Maureen, what are you going to do?" I said, "Penelope, I'm going to do what your mother could not do for you. I'm going to stop him before another woman has to find out the way you did." She said, "Can I help?" I said, "Yes, if you are willing." The next 4 months were the strangest, longest months of my life. I went to every family dinner. I smiled at Trent. I let him call me Maureen, which I have always hated, because my name is Maureen Hennessy Doyle and only people who care about me call me Maureen, and the rest of the world calls me Mrs. Doyle. I let him kiss me on the cheek at Easter. I let him hug me when he and Hollis got their save-the-dates back from the printer. I let him tell me at my sister's 4th of July barbecue that he had been thinking, and you know what would really cement the marriage, Maureen, would be if we did the lake house transfer before the wedding. Kind of a pre-wedding gift situation to make the timing cleaner for taxes. I said, "Trent, you know I've been thinking about that very thing." He smiled so wide I could see his back teeth. I said, "Let me talk to my lawyer." I did talk to my lawyer. I talked to my lawyer about a great many things. I will tell you what I did not do. I did not put the lake house in their names. I did not sign one piece of paper. I did, however, ask my realtor, a woman named Joyce who had been my neighbor since 1988, to very quietly list the lake house for sale with a private listing, off-market, to a couple from Madison who had been wanting it for years and had made me an offer twice before. They paid $438,000. It closed in late August. I put the money in a trust I set up in Hollis's name only, with a clause that no spouse could access it for 10 years. My lawyer wrote that clause about 6 different ways to make sure it would hold. Hollis did not know any of this. Trent did not know any of this. To them, the lake house was still mine, and the implication was still that it would somehow, someday, be theirs. I spent August and September meeting with the other 2 women. The one from Cincinnati flew up to see me. Her name was Bernadette. She was 61, retired from teaching, and she brought a binder of receipts and emails that she had kept for 6 years out of pure, stubborn fury. The one from Indianapolis, the widow, was named Carly. She drove up with her sister. She brought bank statements. She brought a recording, a voicemail Travis had left her in 2020. Where he had explained why he needed another $16,000 and used the exact same phrase he had used with Penelope. "Trust the process, honey. Trust the process." I sat at my dining room table with Bernadette, Carly, and Penelope on a Saturday in September, and we had coffee and cinnamon rolls, and we built a case the way women have always built cases, which is patiently, with documentation, and with a deep, quiet rage that does not raise its voice. I called the detective, a real one. Howard's cousin's son was a detective in the Chicago Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit. His name was Officer DeSanto, and he was a heavy-set man in his 40s with very kind eyes. He came to my house, he looked at the binders, he looked at the bank statements, he looked at the timeline I had built on 3 poster boards in my dining room. He said, "Mrs. Doyle, I have to be honest with you. Some of this is going to be hard to prosecute. The Indianapolis case might have legs, the Cincinnati case might. But the bigger picture, the pattern of fraud across multiple states, the unlicensed financial advice, the wire transfers, that's federal, that's FBI." I said, "Then call the FBI." He said, "Mrs. Doyle, are you sure? Because once this starts, it doesn't stop. Your daughter is going to be in the middle of it." I said, "Officer DeSanto, my daughter is already in the middle of it. She just doesn't know yet." He made the call. The wedding was on October 14th, a Saturday. The ceremony was at a Catholic church in Oak Park, the same church Hollis was baptized in. The reception was at a country club out in Hinsdale, the kind of place with a long sloping lawn and a tent set up for cocktail hour and a string quartet playing Vivaldi. I want to tell you about the morning of the wedding. I woke up at 5. I put on my dressing gown. I sat in the kitchen with my coffee, and I looked at the framed photograph of Howard on the windowsill, the one of him on the dock at the lake house holding a small-mouthed bass and laughing. And I said out loud, "Howard, I hope I'm doing this right." I think he answered me, "I really do." Some women might say it was the furnace clicking. I'm telling you, it was him. The ceremony was beautiful. Hollis looked like every dream I had ever had for her. Trent looked like a man counting money in his head. I sat in the front pew and I held my sister's hand, and I did not cry because I knew what was coming. At the reception, I had arranged for an envelope to be placed at every table, 62 envelopes total, 1 at each place setting at the head table, and 1 at the center of every guest table. Each envelope had Hollis and Trent's monogram on the front, the same monogram from the Save the Dates. The guests assumed they were favors or maybe sentimental notes from the bride and groom. They left them alone until after the toasts. The cocktail hour passed. The dinner was served. I ate 3 bites of my chicken and pushed the rest around the plate. Hollis came over to hug me before the toast started. She whispered in my ear, "Mom, thank you for being so good about everything. I know Trent can be a lot." I held her face in my hands. I said, "Hollis, whatever happens tonight, I want you to remember that I love you more than anything that has ever been on this earth, and everything I do because I love you." She looked at me, confused, and then the DJ called her name and she went off to dance her first dance. Officer DeSanto and 2 federal agents had arrived during the salad course and were waiting in the side room off the kitchen. The country club manager, a woman named Janelle, who I have known for 20 years and who had hosted Howard's funeral lunch in that very same room, had agreed to give them the space. After the first dance, after the father-daughter dance, which was done with Uncle Reggie, who had no idea what was about to happen, the best man gave his toast. Maid of honor gave her toast. And then, before Trent could give his, I stood up. I tapped my glass. Once. Twice. The room quieted. I said, "I know I was told I wouldn't be giving a toast tonight, but I'm the mother of the bride, and I'm going to say a few words." Trent's face did something I will remember until the day I die. It was the face of a man whose plan had just developed a hairline fracture and who was trying to decide if it was the kind of fracture that could be ignored or the kind that needed an emergency response. I said, "Hollis, you are the love of my life. You are the best thing your father and I ever did. You are the kindest, smartest, most honest person I know." I paused. "And tonight, because I love you more than I love being comfortable, more than I love being polite, more than I love the fantasy of a perfect wedding day, I am going to give you the truth, the way your father would have." The room was completely silent. I said, "On each of your tables tonight, there is an envelope. I'd like everyone to open them now, please." There was a rustle. A few people looked confused. A few people, the people closest to the head table, opened theirs first. What was inside each envelope was three things. First, a one-page summary, written in plain English, of Travis Donald Vaughn Pruitt's legal name change, his actual employment, his actual income, and his actual residential address, which was a one-bedroom apartment in Berwyn that he shared with two roommates. Second, a list of the three women he had defrauded with the amounts. Third, a photocopy of the police report that Penelope Marsh had filed in 2021 with her permission and her signature on the cover letter. The gas came from table 11 first. That was where one of Trent's co-workers was sitting. The gasp moved across the room like a wave. People stood up. People sat down. People looked at the envelope, then at Trent, then at the envelope again. Someone, I do not know who, said very loud, "Oh my God." Hollis opened hers. I watched her face. I watched my daughter read it once, then read it again, then look up at me with an expression I cannot describe except to say that I have only seen it once before, when she was 4 years old and her father told her that her hamster had died. It was the face of someone whose world had just done something it was not supposed to do. Trent stood up. He was talking very fast. He was saying, "This is insane. This is a hit job. This is Hollis, baby. Look at me. This is your mother trying to ruin our day. This is..." The side door opened. Officer DeSanto walked out, and behind him, 2 FBI agents in suits. They walked directly to the head table. The room had gone completely still. Officer DeSanto said, "Travis Pruitt, we need you to come with us, please. We can do this here, or we can do this outside. Your choice." Trent looked at Hollis. He looked at me. He looked at the door. He started to move toward the door, and one of the agents stepped in front of him, very calmly. Trent said, "I want a lawyer." The agent said, "That's your right, sir." They put the cuffs on him in the side hallway, out of sight of most of the guests, which was a small mercy I had asked for. They walked him out through the kitchen. The room exploded. People were on their feet. Hollis was sitting in her chair, very still, holding the papers in her lap. I went to her. I knelt down on the floor in my mother of the bride dress, and I put my arms around her, and she did not pull away. She did not look at me, but she did not pull away. She said, "Mom, how long have you known?" I said, 7 months. She said, "Why didn't you tell me?" I said, "Because if I had told you in March, you would have asked him, and he would have lied to you, and you would have believed him, because that's what loving someone does. I needed it to be the kind of truth he could not lie his way out of. I needed witnesses. I needed law enforcement. I needed it to be over before it could get worse." She was quiet for a long time. She said, "He wanted the lake house." I said, "I know, sweetheart. I sold it." She looked up at me then. Her makeup was running. She said, "You sold the lake house?" I said, "I sold it in August. The money is in a trust in your name." He could not touch it. He was never going to touch it. He was never going to touch it. Your father and I worked too hard for that. And then my daughter, who is 32 years old and the senior account director at a marketing firm in the Loop, put her head on my shoulder and cried like she did when she was 8. In the weeks after, things came out the way they do. Travis Pruitt was charged federally with wire fraud and identity-related offenses. The Indianapolis case was reopened. Bernadette in Cincinnati got a victim's advocate. Penelope Marsh wrote me a letter that I keep in my Bible. The wedding gifts were returned. The honeymoon, which Hollis had paid for entirely on her own card, was non-refundable. And she took her best friend Yolanda instead and sent me a picture from a beach in Turks and Caicos of the two of them laughing, and the caption said, "Mom, I love you. Thank you." The hardest part was not the wedding. The hardest part was the 3 months after, when Hollis was angry with me sometimes, even though she knew. Anger doesn't follow logic. She was angry that I'd known and waited. She was angry that I'd been right. She was angry mostly at him, and I was the only safe place to put some of it. I let her put it on me. That's what mothers do. She lives with me now temporarily. She's been with me since November. She has the upstairs bedroom that used to be hers as a girl, and we have coffee in the mornings, and we talk about everything and nothing. And slowly, she is becoming herself again. I want to tell you one more thing, and then I'll let you go. Last Sunday, Hollis and I drove out to Pleasant Lake. The new owners had said we could come up any time. We stood on the dock that I rebuilt in 2019 with my own two hands. The water was gray. The air was sharp. Hollis put her arm through mine, and she said, "Mom, I never thanked you properly." I said, "Hollis, you don't have to." She said, "I do, because you saw what I couldn't see, and you didn't make me feel stupid for not seeing it. You just took care of it." I said, "That's the job, honey. From the day they put you in my arms, that's the whole job." We stood there a long time. I think about what Trent said to me that morning in my kitchen, about how I needed to let her fly the nest, about how I couldn't be the main character at every event, about how I had done my part. I want anyone listening to know this. A mother's part is never done, not when her child is 2, not when her child is 32. Not when her child is 62, if I'm lucky enough to live that long. Some men will tell you that loving your child too much is a flaw, that protecting them is interfering, that seeing what they cannot see is overstepping. Those men are usually the ones with something to hide. And sometimes, just sometimes, when a man tells a mother to disappear, what he is really telling her is that he is afraid of being seen. I see him now. I see him very clearly, and he is the one who disappeared. I have been thinking a lot, in the months since the wedding, about cause and effect, about how a man like Travis Pruitt does not appear out of nowhere. He is built, slowly, by every person who shrugged at his lies and let him keep going, by every fiancé who didn't file the report, by every employer who didn't check his credentials, by every mother who told herself, "It's not my place." He gets bigger the longer nobody names him. That is the law of it. Silence feeds him. Truth starves him. When Hollis asked me, on the dock at Pleasant Lake, why I waited 7 months instead of saying something in March, I told her the honest answer. I waited because love makes a person deaf in one ear, and I needed her to be able to hear me with both. If I had spoken too soon, she would have asked him, he would have wept and apologized and explained, and she would have chosen him, because that is what loving someone does to your good sense. I needed the kind of proof that did not need me to defend it. I needed him to be caught, not accused. There is a difference, and the difference is the entire reason he is in a federal courtroom this spring instead of on a beach in St. Lucia, with my daughter's money. I want anyone listening to take 3 things away from what I went through with that man. The first is about character. Be the kind of person who does the slow, boring, careful work, the lists, the phone calls, the drives out to a forensic accountant's garage on a Tuesday afternoon. Drama is fast and feels like progress. Patience is slow and actually is progress. Travis Pruitt was undone, not by a shouting match, but by a binder and a folder and 3 women in 3 states who kept their receipts. That is not glamorous. It is, however, what works. The second is about intelligence. Trust what you see, not what you are told to see. Trust the salt on the rug. Trust the wink. Trust the question about the lake house that he asked 1 too many times. Your instinct is not paranoia. It is a lifetime of pattern recognition, and women my age have a great deal of it, and we should stop apologizing for using it. The third is about strength. Strength is not the loud version. Strength is what allowed me to smile at that man at Easter dinner while a federal investigation was opening underneath his feet. Strength is the long game. Strength is loving your child so much that you are willing to be wrong, to be hated, to be the bad guy for a season. Because somewhere on the other side of that season is a daughter who can finally see clearly. Hollis is upstairs in her old bedroom tonight. I can hear her on the phone with her best friend Yolanda laughing at something. That sound, that laugh, is the only payment I ever needed. Everything else was bookkeeping.